Hello and welcome to What's the Next Step with me, Sarah Harper. Each week I'm here with a different guest who comes on and shares their experiences in life and work, and we talk about hot topics, interesting things. So please come and join us and let me know what you think. I'm on Instagram, you can watch full episodes on YouTube, and I'm on What's the Next Step podcast at gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And please hit subscribe, it makes a huge difference. Thank you very much. Today, we're joined by Francesca Segal, an award-winning novelist. We recorded this face-to-face back in August of 2024. It was a real pleasure talking to her. She's one of my favourite novelists, as you'll come on to hear. Her first novel, At the Innocent Age, back in 2012, won a bunch of different awards. And since then, she's written The Awkward Age and a recently published book called Welcome to the Glorious Tuga, which is the first of three. She has also written a memoir, Mothership, which is an incredibly powerful and moving read, which we come on and talk about. So I'll see you on the other side. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome, Francesca.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's really great to have you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So
Me too.
Nice to see you. So there are two authors whose books I always make sure I buy and read because I'm always so excited. One is William Boyd and one is you.
Oh, that's so lovely.
And I absolutely can never wait till you bring out your next book. It's just so exciting. I mean, I think that the way that you write, in particular, for me, it's about your amazing ability to really touch on and understand human behaviour so brilliantly, and the nuances of it I just find so enjoyable to read. Plus, you're really witty, and for me that's just an ideal combination.
Oh,
so thank you.
Well, I think it all comes from just being really nosy.
Oh well, that's a good. Well, keep doing what you're doing. It's working. One thing that I'm just really interested in, I'd love to start with, is just how you go about writing a book, because it's quite extraordinary what comes out for those of us who end up enjoying the read, but I would imagine there's quite a lot of iterations and process that goes through. I mean, do you wake up on a Monday morning and think, right, chapter 1, and then it all flows beautifully from there, or how does it work?
I mean, wouldn't that be nice?
In the ideal world.
In an ideal world. For me, I am not one of those people. I know novelists who have a sort of this unbelievable stew of ideas, right, and it's just a case of pulling one down. And for me, the initial spark of a book is actually quite hard to come by. I don't have a whole sort of shelf of ideas lined up for my next books. And so when an idea comes, it's really precious and special. And I sort of try and hang on to it. And from there, it can be years, really, trying to work out what to do with this germ that's come. But I'm a really firm believer in just the first draft as fast as possible.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
A bad first draft. Because also, and I realise other writers feel differently about this, but for me, the joy is after that. I take no pleasure in the blank page at all. It's hellish.
Right.
And for me, the work is, the first draft is 15%.
Wow.
And the rest is iterating and iterating and iterating. And that's, for me, the pleasure of the work. Taking something very rough and turning it into something that is hopefully in 3 dimensions.
How exciting is that? I mean, but years. I mean, that's quite a lot of sort of self-motivation, I suppose, to keep you going.
I think it has to be. I mean, it's sort of a self-motivation / obsession,
right?
Really. If I could do anything else, I would. I don't feel like this is necessarily a path to great joy, although it is a path to fulfillment for me. Years, because I think it takes time within a book to know what it is one is interrogating, I think. The ideas aren't always obvious, and I think it takes getting to the end of that first draft and sitting back and saying, gosh, I seem to be slightly fixated this time on this. And I mean, people do say never trust an author to tell you their own themes, because none of us can know our own subconscious and what we're actually sort of returning to. But I do think that the ideas that are buried in a first draft that's when you get to lift them up and start to be a bit more intentional about expanding them and echoing them and removing things that don't work.
God, that's so interesting though, and such a lesson perhaps for the rest of us in presumably being extremely open-minded then. You're obviously not going into it with a fixed idea or a fixed mindset. Instead, you're going into it with a view to improve and change and evolve over however long it takes you to write it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's always the hope that you will write a bad first draft and it will turn out to be a
one.
work of genius.
Yes, I see. Yeah, I see.
But
the flexibility to then sort of evolve something is quite a good skill in life, isn't it?
Yes, I think so. And also I think it's really, really important for anyone who wants to write not to compare your own first draft to anything that's on a shelf, because the chances are that has been through so many drafts, both alone and then with an editor. And it's okay for the first draft to be bad. They often are.
Yes. So how do you know when the idea does come to you that that's actually an idea that's worth at least starting the draft of?
Because I can't stop thinking about it. I think it's that awful thing of like, when you know, you know. Yeah. It's because they are so infrequent that I really stop and pay attention if an idea comes into my head. And if you start to sort of expand it and it keeps growing, I think.
Yes, that makes sense.
That makes
complete sense. So can we talk about Glorious Tuga, which is your most recently published novel, which I have read and thoroughly enjoyed. Tell us about where that idea came from and maybe a little bit about the book and your thinking behind it.
So Welcome to Glorious Tuga was, that was a totally other experience from anything I've written before, because it came from this longing for really to read a book. I've sort of written the book I needed to read. I think the world feels very dark at the moment, and it has done through various iterations of, we don't need to go back to the pandemic and everything, Brexit and everything that was happening before then, but we've had a series of really socially divisive issues both in this country and wider. And I just was craving connection and community and hope and joy. And I wanted to get out of everything that was happening. And there are really, really important works of fiction that engage head on with all of those things that are happening. And I didn't want to do that because I didn't feel I needed a space. I needed to create a space for myself that was completely apart from all of it. And so I went very intentionally into looking for something that would be other. And so briefly I thought, well, maybe I should write a historical novel because that takes you away from all of this. And I couldn't get away from the reality that it doesn't matter how far back you go, all of this would still be coming. And so I've just taken this sidestep. So Tuga is a tiny little island in the South Atlantic. It's a British overseas territory. It doesn't exist, but it very much could, because we have other British overseas territories in the South Atlantic, and they're all on the same volcanic ridge. So I have just taken an undersea volcano and pushed it a little bit further. Yes, I've brought it to the surface, and it's north of Ascension, so it has better weather than the real British overseas territories. Although I think Ascension has decent weather, and so I created an island, and because I'd created it, I got to be the architect of all of it. So there was no native population. This is very much not a colonialist narrative. It is an island that is a place of refuge for anyone who needs it. So everyone who has ever come to it is fleeing either persecution or displacement of some sort. And it's a humanist collectivist community, very small, quite eccentric. And my main character is a vet from North London who goes there on a conservation mission to take care of their very, very rare tortoises, but they've never had a vet before. So she's meant to be researching the tortoises in the jungle, but she gets sucked into caring for the farm animals and the dogs and the donkeys, and also gets sort of pulled into this community life as well.
Including a very tense love interest.
Yes, including a very tense love interest. Well, as I said, I've written my happy place.
Well, exactly.
So.
but it absolutely was a journey of escapism, wasn't it? It was just so joyful to read, and a very quick read, by the way, because it's one of those books that you don't want to put down. So I think you absolutely created your perfect world, but certainly for the rest of us who get to read it as well, it's just such a joyful, uplifting read. And you're right, it does take you away from thinking about all the other stuff that's going on in the world. So thank you for writing it.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. I'm thrilled to think that it has
fulfilled
the brief.
So you have 2 other novels before Glorious Tuga, some of which you've won awards for. I mean, what does it feel like? That's the ultimate recognition, presumably, for a writer. How does that feel?
So it was the awards were all for my first novel, and there were a few of them. And my second novel didn't win any awards. That's important to note, actually, because it's not, one doesn't get you think, oh, well, it's going to be like this forever now, but it doesn't work that way. But it was quite amazing. The Costa First Novel Award did change my career completely, because it is just this huge stamp of validation that comes from the sky. And actually probably a lot of what it changed was within me, and feeling, that sort of like I'd been given permission to carry on, which is awful because one doesn't need permission. That's the whole point. You have to just keep on, regardless of the obstacles. But it was a great gift for me. I didn't experience that feeling of sort of stage fright and thinking, oh God, how do I follow this? Okay. I had the opposite. I just thought, okay, it's going okay.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. And it's really interesting because somebody who grew up in the corporate world, I was forever being given feedback, both constructive as well as any positive. And so I felt as though I always had a decent understanding as to how I was doing, basically, and the permission point.
Yes.
Whereas that's why I was thinking about how that sort of recognition must be really important, because you presumably, I suppose you get reviews for books from readers. And presumably the number of books that you sell gives you an indication as to how well received something is, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. But readers' reviews, that is a black hole down which one could disappear forever, because, you see 5 stars on Amazon, arrived very promptly. Right. Oh, God. Or 1 star, damaged upon delivery, and you just
God, that's a bit of a roller coaster, isn't it?
And then there are the people who genuinely hate it. That book that won the first Costa Award had a review I will never forget quite early on that said, the perfect book to take on holiday. It made a very satisfying splash when I threw it in the swimming pool.
Oh no.
So you have to decide quite early on, am I going to listen or am I not going to listen? And I know an awful lot of people who just don't read their reviews at all. I don't have that self-discipline. But I recommend it if one can find it within oneself to just not listen. Oh, well, thank goodness you won the awards and you can hopefully not worry about that. Other people were very nice. Yes, okay. Other readers were very nice, but obviously I don't remember any of the nice things they said. I just remember that one as though it's been sort of emblazoned. Of course, why are we like that as humans? We just focus on the negative, don't we? So destructive. It's very hard to actually pull yourself out of that, but I'm here to remind you, Francesca, that you're an extremely good writer. Oh, well, we very much enjoy what you write. Thank you. The first non-fiction that you wrote was Mothership. Yes. Which I found the most emotional book that I've ever read. I cried almost all the way through, except for one bit right at the beginning where you really made me laugh out loud, which I'll mention in a bit when we've perhaps explained about it. I think it's an extraordinary memoir, which is really a tale of hope and overcoming really difficult things, and love and friendship, and so many things. Perhaps explain what it's about and we can go on and talk about it, because I thought it was incredible. Thank you. Mothership was really a book I never thought I'd write for so many different reasons. I never thought I would write about myself, and I didn't really have any ambition to write non-fiction, but my twins were born very premature. They spent 2 months in hospital, and in the months after they were discharged, everyone said to me, because it's the thing that people say to writers, are you going to write about it? Oh. And I said, absolutely no way. And I really felt that. I couldn't think of anything I wanted to do less. And then when they were about 2, they were discharged from, you have a lot of outpatient care when you have very premature children, and we were back in hospital with them all the time. And we had this almost like a graduation ceremony from the outpatient program when they were 2. And the consultant said, well, I'm going to discharge you now, which one has mixed feelings at that point because they are people with whom one has had a relationship since the birth.
Yeah.
But there was something in me that thought, oh, they're okay now.
Yeah.
And from that point on, this feeling that I wouldn't write about it almost reversed immediately. And I thought, they're okay. And actually, I'm okay. Because that's another question that people ask a lot. So the book is the diary of the 56 days that they were in hospital, and that's the structure of it. But what it really was a sort of a love letter to my daughters, to the NHS, to the women that I met when I was in there, the other mothers. But a lot of people ask, did you write it for catharsis? And I didn't, and I think that's quite important. Other people might write through things, and I think that also is a valid exercise, but for me, I didn't want to. Processing my trauma was for me, and I didn't want to write something until I had control. A lot of the writing is actually from the time, but my ability to understand what I was feeling is different now. And I was okay writing it. And, I sat at my desk, thoughtful, but actually typing away quite happily in a way that I never would have thought myself capable of. Because I had just a little bit of distance from it.
And I suppose to your point, you had been given the okay that they were okay.
Yeah.
Back to the sort of slight permission point in terms of somebody else giving you the confidence that actually things will be okay.
And really understanding at that point that because things had been okay and I felt like I had a sort of an overview of what had happened, that there actually really might be something that might help other people within this as a narrative.
Yes. I mean, the thing that really just I couldn't stop quite crying over was the relationship in particular that you had in the milking shed.
Yeah.
So this is the other mums, isn't it, who were in a very similar situation to you, and obviously all of you were expressing milk.
Yeah.
And so you very, or perhaps it was known before that this is a historical name for it, the milking shed, where you would all go and pump.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine the conversations and the tears and the support and everything that went on in there. It's just such an amazing example of women supporting each other. And I suppose the experience being such a leveller that it really didn't matter at all who was from where or anything. Everyone was going through an incredibly difficult time, and it was about support.
And it was, as you said, it was about women supporting women. And the thing about, one realises very quickly, if one is in hospital for more than just a few days, that hospital is an inherently patriarchal structure. And regardless of recent innovations and how hard people are trying, there is a kind of structure and a prioritising of rational, surveyed decision making that doesn't always make space for instinct, doesn't make space for the kind of compassion that's sometimes needed. And to have a women's space within something that felt so rigid was just such a gift.
I mean, one of the hardest bits to read was about the no pain relief for the feeding tube. I mean,
for lots of procedures, actually.
Is that right? For lots of the procedures for the little tiny babies?
There is a worry that they will stop breathing. Lots of things stop them breathing. So very premature babies have intravenous caffeine, which stops them falling into too deep a sleep. They're not used to breathing. So even if they have supplementary oxygen, they can just stop. So, and I know that any kind of, narcotic pain relief can lower, but it's hard. It's not impossible to administer. So it's, also my daughter's 8.5 now. Things may have changed. I don't know.
Yes,
I'm speaking of the time that they were in, but it was absolutely standard practice for any of the minor procedures that they had to be done without any pain relief. And it is known that premature babies experience pain just as we do, if not more.
Gosh, it's just very... I mean, how did you survive all of that? I mean, I know you had to survive. I suppose that's probably a point, but how did you get through it?
It was the other women, really, I think. It was the support of the other women and knowing that there were people who were going through what we were going through, which also gives you space for humour, because if you have a complete, solid bedrock of understanding and empathy, you're safe to joke. and there was nobody else who understood. Nobody in any of our lives outside was able to really understand what was happening. And the number of people who were trying to be funny but would say something like, well, at least you've got a babysitter, when we had to leave them alone in the hospital at night.
Oh, goodness.
But one of the other women in the milking shed could say that to you in a different way.
Yes.
Just as after we were all discharged, and my group of friends, all of us were discharged with nasogastric feeding tubes.
Yes.
And so on our WhatsApp group at 3 a.m, that was a safe space to joke about how brilliant it was to have a baby you could feed without waking them up. Because you could just stand there with a feeding tube, like Lady Liberty over their cot. But I mean, that's the kind of thing. If someone else had said that to me, I would have wanted
deeply
to.
Inappropriate.
Yes,
I understand that.
So I think the support is.
And are you still friends with these women?
Yes, one of them is my youngest daughter's godmother, and her youngest daughter is my goddaughter.
Lovely. What special unbreakable bond that you must have. Yeah. So I saw recently that you gave evidence at the House of Lords to kind of advocate for premature babies and families. Can you share a bit about that and what you hope to kind of achieve with that?
There is some incredible work happening in what's known as family-centred care, which is trying to bring parents into the care of premature babies as early and as much as is practicable and possible. And actually, parents can do a great deal even when babies are really, really sick. They just need to be taught how to do it. And there are incredible movements, both within and without the NHS, to create wards on which this is possible. COVID gave everything a big setback. Things are now being repaired after that. And there is this committee that's convened to look into preterm birth. And I hope that there will be amazing shifts in access, in the understanding that parents are not visitors, which I think has been a problem for a long time. The idea that there are visiting hours and that applies to parents, and the terminology is quite problematic. But that is changing. Parents are not visitors, they are essential caregivers.
Yes.
And that's slowly coming to be understood.
Yes. Okay. Well, I mean, I wish you so much luck with that. I mean, that just sounds quite fundamental, that parents should be allowed to see their children whenever they would like, basically. So I wish you good luck with that. It's made me think of one of the days that you talk about in Mothership, where you talk a bit about how actually you were learning how to be a mum before you were sort of expecting to be on that journey, and in very stressful circumstances, having to sort of learn at the same time. And there's this amazing... Will you tell the story about how the dad brought the mirror over to you?
Yeah, well, this is the family who we are now incredibly close to. And I had a slightly sort of tricky exchange with... She's called Sophie in the book. At the hand washing sinks. We'd just met. It was my second day or something. And their son had been in hospital for months at that point. It was really very unwell. And I just said something incensed. I didn't know. I hadn't really learned the language of the ward yet. And I said something wrong. And we'd had this sort of slightly tense exchange. But then we were all in the same ward. And there's only 4 babies when they're very sick in neonatal intensive care. There were only 4 babies in this room and 2 nurses. So parents at the cot side or at the side of the incubator, you are just pretending you can't see each other as a sort of a gesture of grace to give you privacy with your child. But you are audible and visible to one another in your hardest moments. And they were there the first time I held one of my daughters. And that involves, it's like a medical procedure. You have to lie down in a chair. You have to sterilise everything. You have to change your clothes into a hospital gown. You have to sterilise everything, take off rings and watches and everything. And then you lie still because the baby has this huge tangle of wires attached to them, and they've got skin that's sort of, you could do damage to with any wrong movement, and their hips can't be moved out of alignment. And so you lie there and a nurse just delivers this being to you. And they tuck them right up here, and they're so tiny. And so I was holding her, which was so beautiful, but I couldn't see her. And it was, I was suddenly felt this sense of terrible frustration that I had this person I'd wanted to meet was on my body, but she was under my chin. And I kept saying to Gabe, my husband, I can't see her, I can't see her. And all of a sudden, Evan came over just across the room, which was a sort of a transgression because it showed that he had heard. But of course he'd heard because he was standing not very far away, and just handed something to Gabe and then just disappeared. And he'd given him a hand mirror, which you can hold, and then you can see them on your body. And it was...
Well, clever Evan.
Clever.
Yeah.
But it was so compassionate and so beautifully done. He didn't look at me because I was like naked and crying and just
he didn't say anything.
Didn't say anything, just handed it, and it just all made sense.
How amazingly handled on his part.
It was so just elegant and generous.
Yes.
And I wasn't to know, the beginning of a friendship that between our families for the rest of our lives.
Is their little boy okay?
He's okay.
He's okay.
Wonderful.
And your girls, we should say, are absolutely okay. Yes. Okay. So
everyone has bits and pieces.
Yes.
But
okay.
Everyone is doing really well.
Okay. Good. I mean, what sort of? I think I've heard you talk before about just the perspective that something like that gives you in terms of how you now go about mothering and parenting. I mean, do you think that you parent differently to people who probably haven't had that sort of experience, or what did you learn from it, I suppose?
Well, I think for better or worse, I probably do parent differently. I was unhinged for the first year after we came out of hospital. I was absolutely unhinged about germs. I was in lockdown years before anybody else because there was the RSV season, which could be very problematic, and I was hand washing, and I wouldn't let anybody in our house, and I wouldn't take them inside a shop when it was RSV season. I would, one of us would wait outside. So that was definitely a negative because my anxiety levels were just at 10 out of 10 all the time. I think I was probably on track I had quite a sort of academic path, and I was probably on track to be a bit of a tiger mother. And I instantaneously couldn't give a monkey.
Right.
That happened, and it has stayed about any of those things. I've asked one thing of them, which was that they live, and they've fulfilled every hope I ever had for them and more, and they are free to do anything. And so they have been set free of a former me that they would have had. I'm sure I would have been awful, I think.
Well, I mean, that sounds like wonderful parenting, to be honest. Worry less about... I think I heard you say that you worry less about whether or not someone's doing grade 6 flute or whether or not they're practicing their bassoon or whatever it is.
Yes,
all of that kind of stuff is your
it,
point. It's just less... Just in the grand scheme of things, it just doesn't matter. Are they happy and are they healthy?
Yes. I find it hard to take those things seriously.
Yes.
Yes. Which also needs adjusting a bit because sometimes they take them very seriously.
Well, that's a good point. So, what is next for you?
Next is... which is also quite different. Next is the sequel to Tuga, which is really joyful because I made this world that I love and I get to stay there. It's also really unusual because I'm creating a piece of work while people are already having opinions on it. Because the first one's out now, has been out 2 weeks. And the second one, obviously, I had a running start at it because of publication schedules, and actually this one was finished a while ago. But I will still be writing this for, the next 6 months probably.
Okay.
So now is
manage my expectations.
It's coming out June 2025.
Okay.
But now I really have to. It's been a lovely outward-looking publication period, and now I have to go back and keep world building and sitting with my characters, tuning out everything. But of course, it's really interesting hearing what people say about the characters and what they hope for them. So in some ways, it's actually really nice to have that feedback. That
is actually interesting. That you wouldn't use that as a way to evolve the story itself. You'll try and actually just stick with how you want it to go.
No, I think it's actually I would a bit,
okay.
But I think there comes a point always where. With any creative process where other voices are really welcome and you spark off them and it's lovely to have input, and then from a certain point one does not want other fingers in your petri dish.
Yes.
Things can sort of, I don't know, it's so tender and sensitive.
Yes, and it's yours.
Yes.
And you really care about it. And I can understand that. Well, I wish you lots of luck.
Thank you
very much. I can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. It's been so lovely.
So that was Francesca. It was such a pleasure for me to be able to get to know the person who has written such brilliant books. I honestly have really thoroughly enjoyed all of them. I find her use of language and humour such a brilliant combination that just totally brings the stories to life for me. One bit that I did mention in our conversation, which I wanted to come back to, which was a particularly witty line that she wrote in her otherwise pretty challenging story, Mothership, was when she talked about how she knew that she was pregnant because she references how we shared a new and urgent interest in anchovies and cottage cheese, which is just such a lovely way of saying it rather than just I had some cravings. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoy all her books. One of the things I love about her books is they're all really quite different. So the diversity is interesting as well, although I'm looking forward to step 2 and 3 of the Glorious Tuga because I'm enjoying that story. Thank you for listening. Let me know what you think, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.